Hey guys, it's been a while since I've actually done a video, so I wanted to start adding these along with some of the articles that I'm talking about. Just kind of go into some more detail, kind of highlight what I'm actually talking about, hopefully putting it into more kind of plain English. Uh, so really today's article and what I was able to dig deep into is one of my favorite topics, but it's mobile hardware. Or actually, sorry, not just mobile hardware, but basically hardware in general. So what's really cool is my dad actually started teaching with my old AP English teacher, and they actually brought up how kind of spot on one of my early AP English reports was on GPUs, or for those of you who don't know what that is graphics processing units. So I actually wrote a paper back in 2009 that's embedded in the article. So feel free to check that out. But it actually really hit at is back in 2009, a lot of these processors were just kind of taking the market. They were very large, very power hungry, and unless you had a big desktop rig, you couldn't really do much with them. But you could start to see the evolution of, hey, once they become more power efficient, let's throw them in a mobile phone, let's throw them into smaller laptops and see what's possible. So when you look today at the GPU that's inside of your phone, it's just about as powerful as what was really out there in 2009 in terms of, let's say, a PlayStation 3 or Xbox 360 performance. And even if you're not a gaming, why is that so cool? Well, how can you have these awesome displays on your phone that are above 1080p resolution? How do you have 4K resolution on your phone? And really, that's only possible because the GPUs evolved so much. Uh, so kind of even to back up here to go with the article, like what really got me excited into this was growing up. It was probably around third grade when I started doing research on my family's computer, what to build, but what the heck was RAM? And why I started to get interested is I love Legos. I love just being able to pop something into a machine. Wow, you get more performance. That's pretty cool. So when I think about RAM, I think of, look, if you have low RAM, think about a sticky note. You can only put so many notes. Say you want to make a cheat sheet. You can only put so many notes on that sticky note before either you write too small you can't see it, or there's just not enough room on there for you to put all the information you'd like. Whereas if you had high RAM, imagine you had a giant notebook piece of paper versus, that little notepad. Now you have more to actually reference upon, and because you can write in maybe bigger blocks, you can also access that quicker. So it's kind of a good little way to think about RAM, but I try and think about all this kind of hardware in that same area. So when you start to talk here, how do you look at CPU optimization or really any chip design? Is think of an assembly line. So when Ford came out with this assembly line, it was maybe an entire warehouse just to get one car. And yes, the assembly line was a better way to do it, but they had all of these different areas there that maybe weren't optimized as much as they could. So when you think about that, how could a warehouse get optimized better to get something out the door quicker? Think of that as kind of architecture design for these chips. But then additionally, you have auto might not be the best example here, but say you just need to ship things out the door. So look at Hot Wheels. If you're going to make a Mustang and you could deliver 100 Hot Wheels cars versus 100 real size cars, what do you think is going to be quicker? Again, might not be the best analogy here, but you can deliver those Hot Wheel cars quicker because you can shrink everything down and use different equipment that is going to be more optimized for making that smaller piece. That is kind of the same thing with what chip design is doing, is because you always have an end goal. And yes, you could do it on a bigger platform that's going to get you there, but it could also be quicker and better optimized if you did it in a smaller manner. So really, in a nutshell, that's what you're looking at for some of those system improvements. So kind of jumping into this, why are GPUs so hot right now? There's a lot of talk. Stock market, why is AMD doing so well? This is actually something I called out back in April, back when their share was actually under $10. I've been saying for about the past year, you need to buy this. And now you see projections with them almost $40 or more for this share. And honestly, I see it even going as high as 50 or 60 just because of the potential for them to eat away at Intel. So why is this really happening? Well, for one, you have to look at GPUs and how they are so efficient at processing neural nets, machine learning, AI models. Uh, they're very efficient for that, and there's going to be a lot of space. So in this regard, AMD is not competing against Intel, it's actually Nvidia. I'll jump to that in a bit. But then also look at GPUs are powering everything. Netflix, again, mobile phones, everything, it's powered by GPUs. That's really the importance here. VR, virtual reality is not possible without GPUs. A lot of the industry is going to say, yeah, we'll put a mobile chip out there for VR. That's still light years away from what the optimized kind of what our eye can perceive in terms of the technology. You need to have really a high-end desktop rig um, with almost 4K panels in front of each of your eyes to really support that. Well, even the beefiest Nvidia and AMD chips right now can barely give 4K at 60 frames per second, let alone at doing that at 90 frames per second and then multiply that by 2. And that's really where they need to get to. And that is not even close to being possible on mobile. Um, but again, it's just interesting that there's different ways to get there. But ultimately, if you don't improve GPUs, you're never going to get to that ultimate state for kind of virtual reality. Um, but why the GPU matters and why I'm also going to talk about CPU is because they're all built on these different manufacturing nodes in these factories, and they're all competing for the same kind of manufacturer. So what gets prioritized there and what ultimately makes out the market is ultimately going to be an impact for how these companies are really interacting. So really looking again at these manufacturers, cryptocurrency was a big thing this past year that really drove up the market. All the industries saying, yeah, that time has passed, and I absolutely do agree with that. And why was cryptocurrency a boom? Well, it was a special process, just like AI. It needs a special set of logic to really be effective, and GPUs were better than CPUs at doing that, which is really why you saw this hike. But the same thing with AI being around, you're still going to have that demand. It's just not going to be as much because a lot of consumers can't jump on that. So kind of jumping now into more of the CPU space is you have to look at Intel and AMD. And running the computing with Dan business here, I've always worked on AMD chips, and by the time I got into this, AMD kind of they sucked. You saw them in very cheap computers. They didn't have the processing power even Intel's low-range chips had. To me, their firmware was always kind of crap. But in order for them to survive, they had to bite off what they could, and that was cheap processors that were low performing. So really, how did this all change? Is a guy by the name of Jim Keller, and this guy's amazing. If you look back in AMD's glory days of the early 2000s when they introduced 64-bit chips, it was really Jim who was leading a lot of that. And then from there, where did he go? Well, he eventually ended up at Apple. And how is Apple so dominant in this mobile space right now? Uh, it's again because Jim was there. How did they get the jump by almost 2 years on Qualcomm and other ARM manufacturers? Was Jim. And how do you see that they can have the performance now of some of these Intel and AMD chips? It again goes back to what he was able to do there, and why other ARM manufacturers are still scrambling to be able to make up with kind of what his brilliance was able to provide there. Uh, so where did he go after that? After Apple, he went to AMD. So when you start seeing Ryzen now in the news, when you start hearing about AMD's Zen architecture, it was really the brainchild of Jim Keller. And again, it takes years for this stuff to be able to get out there. So where you see AMD now is what took years to get into production, but why are these CPUs encroaching on Intel? And it really boils down to they're focusing on the things that matter now. GPUs have to be connected to a CPU in order to work, so there needs to be a lot of bandwidth. My favorite analogy here is a straw. You go to McDonald's and you get a fountain drink. They give you a bigger straw because you're going to drink out of that. You're going to drink your Coke quicker. Meanwhile, if you go and you get say a cocktail and they give you the tiny straw, you're not going to drink it as quick. It's smaller. So think about it in that way, that AMD's chips give you that giant kind of McDonald's sized straw for the CPU to be kind of consuming, drinking that data what a GPU would create. And not just GPUs, but also flash storage now is going over PCI links, which is what GPUs use. But what's the benefit here is, well, now you can access not just graphics data quicker, but you can access your actual kind of cold storage of computers quicker. All this takes a lot of bandwidth that you need to be able to have, and this is what AMD is targeting. And when you look at even AMD's mid-range chips, they almost have double the bandwidth as Intel to perform these things. Now, when you look at these current generations of processors, AMD still can't match Intel's kind of raw performance, but again, what really takes advantage of all of that raw performance? Maybe some very high-end gaming that is a very small target market. Cloud, yeah, you want performance cores, but those cloud providers aren't overclocking their GPUs. They're not really looking for that extra little bit of performance there for that to really be relevant. Um, what does become relevant though are these core counts. And Intel has, because AMD's never been competitive, they've never had to push how many cores they put out there. But think if you're a cloud provider, which really is going to be the biggest enterprise market, how does Intel have 99% market share? Is because they've been dominant in this. But where AMD really extends is, look, if AMD for, let's just theoretically here, for $1,000, they can put out a processor with 32 threads, 32 kind of mini CPUs, if you will, and Intel's putting out for $1,000 one that only puts out 18 of those. Well, why this matters is if you go on Amazon, you want a small cluster, it's going to be two kind of virtual CPUs. For $1,000, you can then get 16 of those nodes spun up as a cloud provider with AMD, versus if you went with Intel, you would only get 9. And again, what's this other benefit here? You still have all of this bandwidth so that you can have solid state drives, that you can spin up GPUs, and you don't have any performance hit there. And that's really what AMD is going to start really digging into Intel for in this enterprise space, is that their processors are a lot better bang for your buck, not just for consumers, but really for these cloud manufacturers. Um, and I mentioned performance there, and I also mentioned how these chips are actually made on the manufacturing side. And you have to look at, okay, Intel's had the performance gain now, but they're stuck at 10 nanometers. AMD's about to move to 7 nanometers. What this means is that performance gap, because AMD can now shrink beyond what Intel is doing, that performance gap should now be either eradicated or AMD should actually be ahead of Intel. And more getting into share price, why should you be concerned is Intel's now at their third generation at the 10 nanometer. They used to be the market leaders for shrinking their manufacturing size. That should raise a lot of red flags for investors of, why can't they move beyond here, and why they're going to continue to lose more ground to different mobile providers because they simply can't keep innovating and can't keep shrinking their node process. And again, going back to Jim Keller, he's now joined Intel, and he's going to do amazing things there, and you're going to see Intel rebound. But the reality is that's going to take anywhere from 3 to 5 years for that to be fully realized. This is more than enough time for AMD to swoop in here. So jumping back into this, let's bring Nvidia into the mix and Nvidia into the conversation. Well, Nvidia, back to that same reason of how AMD can kind of leapfrog performance, is Nvidia just put out this awesome new lineup of Turing class cards. They talk about all these improvements, which they are improvements, um, but they're still stuck at 12 nanometers. AMD's never really been able to be competitive with Nvidia's high end, but again, they're going to be jumping from 14 nanometers all the way down to 7. So this is 42% more space for these processors or GPUs to outperform Nvidia, just because of manufacturing. And because Nvidia doesn't have its own manufacturing node, and if AMD is now saying, hey, I have a bunch of CPUs and GPUs to give these manufacturers business, they're going to go to AMD and not even look at Nvidia because it's just going to make a better business deal. So that then bottlenecks Nvidia into improving on their manufacturing size, and AMD can really start to take the lead here. But even getting into raw performance of AMD, a lot of people don't realize, but AMD's always been great at number crunching. When it gets into AI, machine learning algorithms, and what they really need is this number crunching, AMD's actually been better per watt than Nvidia for quite some time. It's just been that Nvidia, I believe, has the better marketing, the better selling team to be able to get it out there. But with AMD, if they can package some of their CPUs and GPUs to a lot of these cloud providers, it's going to be this 1-2 punch that I really think is going to start really eating away at Nvidia. And in Nvidia, yeah, they have AI, yeah, they have some of their mobile platforms. They were really the market leaders with a lot of this. Going back to my article from 2009, Nvidia took full advantage of everything I was outlining. But where they stand now is there's going to be more competitors in this space, and they've realized all the possible market share that they can. Now it's going to be a matter of holding on to it, and I think that that's going to be very tough for them to do. Again, they're always going to be leaders, but still that market share is going to be much easier for others to grab, which is why Intel is now saying they're getting into the GPU space. I've already mentioned how their business is going to start declining. By them making GPUs, something they haven't done since the late 90s, in terms of an actual chip that they're actually selling as an individual component, to me is because they see that this market is booming for different AI and machine learning, that they too want to be able to sell their CPU and GPU to these cloud providers. So they want to kind of have that package deal. And the fact that they've even partnered with AMD to put their chips on their laptops is also showing that they need to innovate in that direction, even to keep their consumer processors in line with what others are doing. So it's really a different avenue for them to improve across the board. Um, which again is interesting. And also with Intel, what you see is they're making a lot of these custom processors, even for machine learning AI, that are dedicated just to that process. Again, going to an assembly line, maybe it's a very kind of niche product. They're going to make these chips that cater directly to whatever that software needs. And a good example of this is look at the Google Pixel 2. Why is it amazing at taking some of the photos outside of its main camera app? And it's because Google made a special chip in partnership with Intel. Every time a photo is taken in, say, Snapchat or Instagram, it gets automatically processed in this custom chip, that works very fast, very efficiently, and at a fraction of the battery usage of the phone's core CPU. When you start to see these co-processors like that, it's going to be a very lucrative business, and one that's honestly going to propel Intel to find these different markets and different ways to be making more money. Um, so again, getting into the mobile chips there, why Intel, why Nvidia, really why everybody should be scared. Actually, Nvidia not as much because they take advantage of this, but why Nvidia, AMD, what I would call, it's called x86, really the platform, why they should be worried is ARM processors are getting very good very quickly. And this was something that I've been keeping an eye out for a very long time, and I'll hit on it in some future articles with kind of the future of computing. But look no further than Apple and what they were able to do on their A11, their Fusion chip. Those raw performance figures are actually matching Intel's kind of lower wattage chips. And again, they may not be as good as multitasking, but they don't have to be. You have to look at users, and if they're only using one app at a time, that's what really matters. And the fact that they can use, say, I think their desktop class chips are now looking up to 7 watts. That's half the power usage of Intel chips at 15 watts, and you're getting even more performance. So why in the world, if you're making a mobile not processor, but device, would you even be looking at Intel or even AMD in that situation? That's going to be all ARM chips. And say you're looking at a high performance device, you could put a high performing ARM chip that's going to cost the same amount to a provider as kind of a mid-range to low-range AMD or Intel chip. And the benefit there is you can still use the high performance parts, say like storage speed, that are going to give the end user a much better experience than if you did some of these lower end parts with Intel and AMD. And that's only going to become more pronounced in the future with a lot of these different devices. Honestly, it baffles me how you put an Intel chip with an older, slower storage when that slower storage is going to give your users less performance than whatever the heck the CPU was. So it's just very interesting in that regard. Why I would say product managers need to get more in line with these different advantages here for what these chips can offer. But again, I'll highlight in some future articles of how the future is going to kind of better utilize those chips and what the future computing is going to look like. But to really wrap this up is uh, GPUs have come so far in these past couple of years, and it's only going to get more prevalent. And when you talk AI chips, all of these custom learning chips, it's really because of what the GPU has been able to do and how it can expand into different markets. And it's really an exciting time to see it. And I do think AMD, they're going to start obliterating the market and really taking a lot of market share away from Intel. But both AMD and Intel are going to have to be very concerned with what ARM is going to be doing here into the future. So exciting times. But check out the article. I go into a bit more detail. I have a lot of supporting articles for further reading on this. It's definitely something I love talking about. Um, Very interesting space. So drop a comment. I'd love to talk more about it. Thanks for watching.